For the Los Angeles Review of Books, I'm Colin Marshall, coming to you as usual from LARB HQ here in Silver Lake, Los Angeles, California, speaking today with a man who is a founding editor of the Los Angeles Review of Books. He's the author of the books That Summertime Sound and The Sting. He's written for many a publication. He's been working on adaptations of novels like Steve Erickson's Zeroville and the book Pappy Baby by Stephen Elliott. But we're here to talk today about his brand new novel from Tin House called American Dream Machine. It's Matthew Specktor here with me. Matthew, how much could I call this book, American Dream Machine, a novel of the Falstaff of 20th century Hollywood talent representation?
That's a generous assessment, but if you in thinking of Beau, you're referring to Beau, the central character, as being somewhat Falstaffian in aspect.
I would say more than somewhat, but you can tell me.
I would say that's fair. I mean, I would say every character, every interesting character, probably has a line of other characters behind him, and Falstaff being the archetypal large man in literature, I certainly had him in mind.
Now, we have a number of agents in this book. The central agent, Beau, is only one of them, but we have a novel here, a multi-generational Hollywood novel, you might say, and some would call it a warts and all portrayal of Hollywood, but I wonder, there's a bit of a wall you face right away, because it seems like so many novels and movies that come my way, they pitch themselves as, this is the book that finally de-glamorizes Tinseltown. And I think to myself, well, Tinseltown has been repeatedly de-glamorized for the last 80 years. So with that precedent, a pre-de-glamorized Tinseltown, did you think of it as being a pre-de-glamorized thing, Hollywood?
I thought of it really as a subject that I wanted to treat, I wasn't thinking of it in terms of glamorizing or de-glamorizing it. I was really just thinking of trying to treat it as a place like any other place. I grew up here, and I feel like so many other writers that I care passionately about have a strong relationship to place. I mean, there's, people think of Philip Roth, they associate him with Newark. People think of Faulkner, they associate him with Mississippi. People think of Saul Bellow, they associate him with Chicago. And I thought, this is my place. It's the place that I grew up in. It's a place towards which I have, strong and ambivalent, complicated feelings. I both love it very much and find much in it to criticize, which I think is a both of those things are very helpful in treating your subject when writing. And I thought, is it possible to write a novel about Hollywood that is not gossipy, that is not satirical, or at least not exclusively satirical, and that treats the people who live here and work here as more or less ordinary human beings? No matter how grotesque or no matter how distorted they might be by their circumstances, they're still people with regular, complex interior lives. And I thought it was worth doing that because I couldn't think of another book about Hollywood that had, even the great books about Hollywood, maybe especially those books, seem to sort of not to do that. They seem to do something else.
Why do you think that is? Because, I would say something similar. The Hollywood novels I read get a little bit stuck. They get swept up in the Hollywoodiness of Hollywood. What is? They get caught in some kind of mire, typically, that American Dream Machine doesn't. You've just described your goals in avoiding that. But what is it that is snagging so many Hollywood stories, whether they're films or novels or what have you?
Well, it's a good question. I think that one of the things that I think is that it's very difficult for a place or a culture to get around the ideas it has about itself. That's part of what sustains, a country or a city or a culture of any kind. I think that, people who live in Manhattan romanticize Manhattan, and, somehow that romantic Manhattan, becomes the place where they live. Right. And that, by the way, is not a bad thing at all. I mean, in a certain sense, it's what keeps Manhattan from, it's what makes Manhattan a wonderful place and not just a slum. And by the same token, I think that people, that there's a sort of natural and very understandable impulse to demonize Los Angeles a little bit, or to vilify it both on the grounds of its beauty and on the grounds of its its cheapness. Those things are certainly real, but they're not complete. And my interest, again, was just in trying to draw something a little bit more complete. But if the question is, why do people do that? I think and specifically as it relates to the motion picture business, I think that the movie business disappoints a lot of people. It disappoints a lot of people who work in it. It disappoints a lot of people who view its products at the moment. And, and I think that disappointment finds its way into portrayals of it, understandably enough.
Most of Los Angeles is not Hollywood. I mean, that's literally true in the case of Hollywood, the place, but most of Los Angeles is not Hollywood, the industry. I think of this interview with Quentin Tarantino on Charlie Rose when Pulp Fiction just was big, just out, and Tarantino described his movie as being a story about Hollywood, not the industry, but the town. American Dream Machine strikes me as a story about the industry, but also the town. I mean, would you call it an equal balance? This is about Los Angeles and about the industry. Was that your goal?
Yeah, I would consider that accurate. I spent it was a lot of work while I was writing the book to make sure that it never got stranded inside the movie business, which is just a sort of tight prison. It wasn't where I wanted the book to find its emotional and dramatic balance, really. I considered that just to be a backdrop, and a very important backdrop. But in the end, this is really a story about regular human passions and familial ties and all kinds of things that I hope the book reflects outside of the industry. If this book, I don't mind this being considered a novel, that addresses Hollywood or that is about Hollywood, because it does and it is. But if this book is simply, or if it were simply a Hollywood novel, whatever that means exactly, I might consider that to be something of a failure.
But you do follow this Falstaffian talent agent, Bo Rosenwald, through many, many eras of Hollywood. And it makes me wonder, I don't know if you use the word in the book, but people often consider Hollywood films to be the films of Philistines, and the place to be a hotbed of Philistines. And the eras you go through of Hollywood, there's so many kinds. I think of in the 70s, I believe, or the late 60s, Bo gets involved producing a Two-Lane Blacktop type picture, and I was actually coincidentally at a screening of Two-Lane Blacktop right after reading this, so I'm glad I live in Los Angeles. Yeah. But later along the line in his life and career, he finds his greatest success in the schlockiest in the late 80s, where he generally considered to be the worst time in American film, which says a lot about him that we'll get to. But tell me, do you think that the level of Philistinism in Hollywood goes up and down? Is it constant? How do you think about it? Or if you think if there is a level of Philistinism that's meaningful?
Well, I think that there is, but I also think that there's one anywhere. And I think that the level of Philistinism in the culture somewhat rises the more it works towards a common denominator. I mean, one of the problems that the movies have always faced is that it is a business that's forged upon consensus. To write a novel, or you really have to get a series of, to publish a novel, you have to get a series of people to say yes. But you don't have to get a whole room full of, you don't have to get a crowd full of people to say yes to the same thing at the same time. Right. And in that respect, it's a little like democracy itself. It's like lawmaking. Things water themselves down towards a flat point. I do think that there's a movement in the book, as there has been a movement through the last 50 years of American history, towards a kind of a certain homogenization, and a sense that the movie business used to be predicated on individuals with ideas, even if those ideas had to undergo a good deal of approval by committee. They were still, at one point it was a director's medium, and now it's a corporation's medium. And Bo, over the span of his life, lives through that particular set of sea changes, much as as we all as we all have. I mean, I think it's not just the movies that have become considerably more corporate over the last 30 years.
What went wrong in the late 80s? I mean, I'll add here, Bo makes a lot of money on I think a chimp baseball movie named Simply Pete, which cracked me up. I don't quite know why, but clearly you've written this book. You seem to understand that in that time, about 30, 25 years ago, things took a big dive in Hollywood, and I wonder why.
Well, I mean, I think that there are a lot of reasons, and I'm not sure how glibly I want to summarize them, because I think they are kind of dramatized in the book. But certainly, certainly as the studios consolidated somewhat, right around 1990, the late 80s was sort of the moment that Columbia TriStar were bought by Sony. There'd been corporate ownership in the movie business for quite a while before that. But I think that happened not just in the movies, but it's happened in other areas of American life as well. It's happened in publishing. There's just been this sense of the entities that create culture have become sub-entities of larger global corporations. And the more that becomes true, the more aesthetically constricted the culture itself becomes,
And I don't know how much of a problem for most of his career Bo seems to have with that, because you've got this man of, as we've said, Falstaffian appetites, and he's ever trying to satiate them, and he seems to like nothing better or nothing besides getting on the phone and barking at people. I mean, he doesn't really. I mean, does he even like that? Does Bo like anything?
That's a good question. I think of him, he's a very protean fellow. And the question of his own taste is one that the book carefully dodges.
That's why I'm asking it right now.
Throughout. And it's interesting because I'm not sure. I mean, when I think about that, and when I think about what it might reflect, how I might feel about that, I think, I'm not sure. We define ourselves so aggressively by our tastes, and sometimes I find that incredibly tedious in private life, as if the thing that's supposed to make me human are my tastes or my opinions. And in so many ways, one of the things I find kind of noble about Bo is his refusal to simply be reduced to an opinion or a set of aesthetic principles, which, like any other principles, can be confining. I think of Bo as a very large man in many respects. He's large enough to encompass a lot of foolishness and some very unexpected wisdom. He's large enough to encompass some very abusive and unconscious behavior, as well as some very warm and humane behavior towards others. And I think it's possible that nowhere is he wider than in his allegiances, in his ability to attach to other people.
Right. It's a business of allegiances, at least when he begins.
Yeah.
And maybe less so later.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. And whether that reflects a change in the industry or a change in human perspective is hard to say.
Is it better to ask what Bo wants than what he likes? I mean, he wants success. He wants women, food, fast cars, wants to make money and spend money, but
I think he wants more than that. I mean, I to be honest with you, I think all of those are sort of substitutions for, because again, if one defines Bo in terms of the things he's pursuing, and only intermittently through the book does he actually pursue those things. In fact, there are suggestions in it, during some of the book's kind of rawer moments, that his, that whatever's driving him, it's not sex, it's not money, it's not the things that he's intermittently, but again, not excessively partaking in. I hope, careful to structure the book. I know I was careful to structure the book in such a way so that Bo was never seen to be chasing that stuff for very long.
Yeah.
I think he's probably motivated by the things that motivate everybody, which are a desire to be accepted and loved and feel at home in the world. And obviously, by giving him some of the characteristics that I gave him, I just make that difficult for him, as it's difficult for everybody.
And Beau is an agent. His colleagues are agents. His friends and enemies are often agents. What is an agent?
You mean that literally? What is an agent?
Well, we all know what an agent is. I mean, they get jobs for actors,
Right.
or other directors, or they hook people up together so that they can make a movie. But what is what is the role of an agent?
That's an interesting question. I mean, obviously, one of the things that fed my desire to make Beau an agent is the fact that my own father is an agent, even if my own father doesn't resemble Beau very much at all. I did change Beau's role considerably over the course of the book. He starts as an agent, then he becomes an independent producer, then he becomes an agent again, then he becomes a less independent producer. And I think it's telling that I changed that for him, because an agent's job is to, because it's a little bit of the difference between being a buyer and being a seller. And I needed him not to get stuck in one place for too long. I think of an agent as somebody who connects things, somebody who puts things together. And if you look at it in that somewhat broad and perhaps slightly homogenizing light, it's not such a leap between being an agent and being a writer.
Are agents hounded by the sense that their profession is not as definable as that of a writer or a director or an actor, that they make more money perhaps, but are in a more nebulous place?
Well, I couldn't say. I mean, I think that, but I do think again that probably you can invert that into a question about what it means to pursue the arts in life versus what it means not to. A lot of people still seem to want to pursue the arts, despite the fact that it's not a spectacularly sustainable profession. It does not, except in very rare cases, make one very much money at all. And so, I would imagine that Beau is probably torn by, quietly torn perhaps by some of the things that I've heard expressed from my own parents or from people that I know who aren't in the arts. I know lots of people who sort of vaguely, I wish I could write, or I wish I could play music, or I wish I could paint. But I don't think he has that overwhelming desire. I think he just likes being in that milieu, and he likes being able to advocate on behalf of artists. That I have observed in my father, who is a man without any specific talent in that regard, and by his own admission. But he likes that. He likes movies, and he likes being able to, help his clients, his writer clients or his actor clients make the kind of movies that they want to make.
And no doubt he wants to see the movie. Like he himself wants to see the movie. Therefore, let's help get this thing made. I want to watch this thing.
Well, he will also, I have seen him counsel his clients against doing movies that might pay well but that he doesn't think are good.
The sort of Pete's of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Now, one of Beau's sons becomes, I guess, he becomes a novelist, which I guess you might call a straight-up artist, I suppose, breaking from his father's pathway in that sense. But you do follow two generations here. You follow Beau's generation, what I guess would have been born in the 30s, and the sons born in the 60s. Yeah. Your generation, growing up in Los Angeles, sons of the industry. What about that experience, your generation's experience in that setting, did you find it important to get across first, or the elements that first came to mind like that? That's something that it was true about the way I grew up here that I haven't read about, I haven't seen on screen.
Well, I don't know if this was necessarily first, but I will preface this by saying that almost everybody that I knew growing up seemed to go into the arts in some way, shape, or form. I can remember going to my 20-year high school reunion and seeing my headmaster, and there was one person who remarked that they had become a corporate lawyer, and the headmaster of my school was just stunned. He just thought, "Wow, now I've seen people, they'll do anything, right. even go into corporate life."
Was it something about the school or something about your cohort?
Well, I think it was something about growing up in the industry, which fosters which is the arts, and I think that if I had been born on the East Coast and my cohort had all been the children of Wall Street types, then we probably would have gone a somewhat different direction. Even though I think that, I think that the way that pressure tends to exert itself between generations is common. I think people drift towards what they know, and at the same time, particularly if what they know is a world as bloody and problematic as Hollywood can be, they might fight it a little bit too. So I wanted to capture, and it wasn't so much about, being regionally specific so much as being humanely faithful to what I think is a very, very common thing, which is children critiquing the world of their fathers or the world of their parents and being drawn to it at the same time. I don't think that's a West Coast thing. I think that's a real, deeply human movement between one generation and the next.
And people who came more recently to Los Angeles, like me, I think it's something we often say to each other. Los Angeles is fun now. We like it now, but boy, we wouldn't have wanted to be there in the 70s. So tell me, growing up in the 70s and 80s in Los Angeles, it seems like there was fun to be had. It wasn't so bad. It has a bad image now from the movies of the time. But what was it like growing up here then?
It's funny. My friend and colleague Dana Spiotta and I were just having a conversation. Dana Spiotta, the novelist, and Dana said to me, "Can we just agree that Los Angeles in the 70s and 80s was the best/worst place in the world?"
Best of times, worst of times.
And I do think it was. I do think it was both. And in some ways, I also just think that that's what adolescence is like. And again, you can look at, I don't know, a book like The Ice Storm. You can look at Rick Moody's portrayal of being a teenager on the East Coast in the 70s, and you can find a lot of commonality. I think it was a, as we know, sort of a famously at once hedonistic and sort of an anhedonic time in American life too. There was a sense of exuberance when it came to the use of chemicals and sex, and at the same time, a sense of those consequences falling into place. And I think no matter where, maybe not no matter where, but I think there were a lot of places in America and in the world where the 70s and 80s were an interesting trial along those lines.
Right. Your younger characters especially, they're split, whether geographically or in their consciousness between Los Angeles and New York. And I take it, in the 70s, you ask somebody, what are the worst places in America? They say, Los Angeles and New York, probably. I mean, it was in either of the major cities, it was kind of that was the same situation, right? Yeah, well,
there was, I certainly know I grew up with it, kind of my consciousness of New York was, certainly when I was a teenager, I just thought, I want to go there. I want to live there. I don't want to be
What about it made you think that's so much better than Los Angeles?
I'd watched too many Woody Allen movies.
Oh, sure.
No, I was drawn to it, I think, because it struck me, and I might add, struck me from afar, as being more authentic, more intellectual, more culturally my scene. And, I did live in New York for many years, and I love it. But I guess what I finally found is that I'm at home here, and and I think that the balance sheets for either city, for any city almost, it tends to work out about equal. There are marvelous things about Los Angeles. There are certainly things about New York that I miss and yearn for, but that I finally just decided to embrace this place with all of its problems and all of my problems and see if I could reconcile them. Because I think that's a rewarding thing to do if you're a writer or you're a person, is try to make your peace with where you're from.
See if you can make your problems somehow compatible with the problems of the place or find the place with problems compatible with your own.
Sure. I think it's like any other kind of relationship. That's what one wants. Yep.
You have also done work in the capital I industry. What was there a time when you realized, when you had an awareness going on and you realized you were doing research consciously or unconsciously for a novel about agents in some sense?
No, there really wasn't. I have worked in the industry. I worked somewhat reluctantly as an executive and as a producer, and then less reluctantly as a screenwriter, which I still do. And I found it I don't, I never felt consciously I was doing research. If anything, I for a long time felt, well, I don't know how one would ever want to write about the movie business, because how could one do it without just, falling into that trap of trying to satirize something that's self-satirizing, or criticize something that's self-critiquing. Right. But eventually there too, I like to think that I gained a little bit of adult perspective and realized that it was really just a culture like any other culture, worth thinking about seriously, and trying to make some sort of acceptable pact of recognition with.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've alluded to the traps of writing about Hollywood, but tell me the traps your characters face working in Hollywood, being agents, starting their own agencies, trying not to steal each other's clients, but doing it anyway sometimes. What do you see as the sirens, I guess, that call out to these characters, especially of the older generation, that they avoid or don't avoid?
I think all of them are dealing, again, with something that they're dealing within the industry with something that's not necessarily industry specific, which is the problem of success. And I think, for everybody who's pursuing a goal, the question becomes, well, what happens when you attain it? And particularly when that goal is materially lavish in its rewards, which I think creates a very, very specific set of problems, because it then becomes hard to double down and think you'll just pursue something bigger. Right. What happens if there isn't anything bigger to pursue, and yet you're still left with the impulse to keep pursuing, as we all probably will be until we drop. And there too, I felt that, Bo in particular was a really good vehicle for contending with that. A man of sort of seemingly unending appetite, and yet with enough conscience and just enough intelligence to really realize that you can't live like that. That sooner or later, to quote Oliver Stone, how many yachts can you water ski behind?
I like that one.
Yeah. So I think of that as being the primary thing that they're contending with, which is, again, hopefully something that one finds in all kinds of strong drama, which is, what are the costs of getting what you want?
I recall that, of course, Bo has success as an agent as well as a producer, but I think of real Hollywood stories, and for some reason the successful producer is always held up as, I guess Don Simpson always gets brought up in terms of someone, depending on how you look at it, made a monster by a success, or was monstrous and was made more monstrous by a success, or was purely a victim of just pushing harder and harder to satiate his desires. Why do the successful producers seem to rise in the zeitgeist as like they're the worst? You know what I mean? I'm not saying it's true, but
I do know what you mean, and it's a I've certainly witnessed it, in any number of occasions. I think that I've seen, people in Hollywood who come in as assistants, and you think, oh, they're so nice. And then you encounter them later and you just think, what happened? And I think part of me thinks that it's a culture, sometimes I look at contemporary Hollywood and I see it as a culture like the Marines. It's like it actually is sort of die casting people into being a certain way. In other words, you go on somebody's desk, they abuse you for a certain number of years. And, this is not an original idea. We've seen it in, I don't know, that movie Swimming in Sharks, gave you that. Exactly. And I think that's a common enough story. But again, I think unto itself, it's not a very interesting one. If there's anything that I was really chasing in this book, it's that that the monsters really aren't that monstrous. And, there are generations of monsters, and there are different types. It's, one question that the book seems to, postulate is whether the character of Emily White, who on the one hand, does not seem monstrous in the way that Bo seems monstrous. But I'm not sure which of them is actually the more monstrous figure in the end.
There's a line that Bo says to Emily when she hears the rap that he's playing in his car, and she asks, do you really like that stuff? And he says, people like it, and I'm people. And that seems to be a key into Beau's character. But it seems to make all the sense in the world and also no sense at all. I mean, you know what? Maybe that's the kind of line you want to go for. Well,
I was thinking of that line when you were asking me about Beau's taste.
Yes.
And I was thinking that as being kind of a key to it, which is to say it is nonsense. And I see that kind of logic in Hollywood fairly often, which is to say I have, the taste of someone who has no taste except what they're told they should be liking.
It's like this. I mean, maybe you've had these moments, but you'll be sitting next to somebody on a train or what have you, and you'll hear their headphones. They'll have earbuds in, listening to music, and you hear a recent #1 hit. You'll hear, a song that's been topping the charts, that's been inescapable in the public realm, but somebody's actually listening to it on their earbuds. And I think to myself, that seems wrong. I know it's a huge hit, but that's not something a person listens to. That's something people listen to. So it sounds odd to say I don't understand when I hear somebody listening to a big hit because people are listening to it. But a person doesn't like that. A person doesn't like Pete, right?
Well, I'm gonna hesitate on that one because I think in a lot of ways that and I'm gonna hesitate not because I don't. I know exactly what you mean, and I also know that the novelist in me is, has that sort of contrarian instinct to go towards things that feel like private discoveries rather than kind of reflexive communions.
Now, I'm not saying popular equals bad either. To clear that up.
No, I know you're not, and neither am I. But what I'm also saying is, again, I think looping back to question. What we mean by taste and the importance of taste. There's a wonderful book by a Canadian writer named Carl Wilson called "What We Talk About When We Talk About Love," and is that what it's called? It's about Celine Dion. It's not the Raymond Carver. It has a title that's something like that.
I think the title might be the same, but in any case, that book I've read about that book. I want to pick that up.
It is a fantastic book. It does not quite share the title with the Carver collection, but it is it's a really good interrogation of taste as a sort of status tool and things like that. And when I think about Beau in the movie, it strikes me that when he actually exercises his own taste, or when he is involved in producing the things that would seem most to reflect it, that taste is at once problematic, but not lowbrow or stupid. We see him trying to produce the Two-Lane Blacktop kind of movie. We see him trying to produce a Robert Stone novel. These are not. These seem to be the places where he's exercising something that feels closest to what you would call his own taste, which is not what you'd expect at all. And I do think that there too I wanted to sort of clarify that the idea of producers and agents and people in Hollywood as vulgarians is just incomplete. Is what I would say.
I see. I don't want to put down Celine Dion yet, as in I don't want to drop the subject yet, because in that book, from what I've read about it, there's this question looming over it. Celine Dion is both super popular, and you personally don't know anybody who likes her, for most people. So is it that, same with a lot of Hollywood movies, like, you see the movies put out by, say, Adam Sandler's company that are not his movies, but sort of the tier below that still make a lot of money, but it's like, they're popular, but you don't know who's watching them exactly. Is it that these things, a lot of people like them just enough to not experience them?
I think, first of all, that there's a definite distinction here that's sort of, it's not identical to, but it's kind of akin to the red state, blue state. I live in Los Angeles and I know a couple Republicans, but not many compared to the, and at the same time, there are a lot of them. And I think, that the same can be said. I think that our tastes and our tastes, like our politics, our tastes, which in many respects are our politics, can really be very insular and can really lead us into an insular space. I mean, I don't know very many people. I'm not sure that I know anybody who listens to Celine Dion without irony. And, the only person I know who listens to a tremendous amount of top 40 radio is my 8-year-old daughter. But that does not mean that there aren't a lot of people who do. And furthermore, it doesn't in any way, shape, or form indicate that my aesthetic impulses are superior to theirs. It's just different.
And that's what fascinates me is what the nature of the difference is. I mean, does the question occupy your own mind as much as it does mine? And things get a lot more interesting when you say, that movie isn't good, that movie isn't bad, but how are they different?
Yeah. I mean, I do ask that question. Sure. I wouldn't say it's a major preoccupation, but I try not to fix my own tastes too aggressively. I mean, of course we all do. We all say, I like this, I don't like that. But, certainly, and especially when it comes to literature and when it comes to writing, and music and movies, I circle back a fair amount to things that I, used to think I didn't like. And I think, especially with, being a writer and you read literature, and a book is never the same book twice. Right.
What's something you have circled back to that you were sure wasn't for you?
I won't say. I mean, this is certainly nothing that I dismissed, but I think of Madame Bovary, a book that I didn't really understand until I read it a third time. I read it when I was 18. I read it again when I was almost 30, and both of those times it left me quite cold. And then I read it when I was 40, and just initiating a divorce, and I thought, oh my God, this is the most amazing, shattering novel ever. And again, I think of Jane Austen as someone that I made several assaults on in my 20s before I really had an epiphany.
You had to know the epiphany was coming because there were multiple assaults.
I think sure, and I might add, would I make that? Would I spend as much time trying to find a way to love an Adam Sandler movie? Probably not. I don't know that I would. But the obverse is also true. There are books and writers that I've cared passionately for at one point and then come back to later and thought,
the issue of taste fixing I see manifest itself in Beau's son, whom we mentioned, the one who becomes the novelist. We see him grow up and he goes through what I guess we would call phases, different aesthetics, where he's hardcore this way one year and hardcore that way the next, wearing the drag of a certain movement. He likes certain writers or certain types of music, and we all did it in our teenage years. No matter how old we are, when we were teenagers, we drew our battle lines with our tastes. Yeah. And I think about this a lot. Why did we do that? Was it just we didn't have anything else?
I think when you're a teenager, that stuff it's what you have. I mean, your allegiances, while you are still forming as an individual, your allegiances are what protect you. They were for me, and I think I do sort of show the boys in their teenage years and into their early 20s as being very aesthetically and intellectually confident, and then perhaps becoming less so. Some of them do. I think Nate becomes less so. I'm not sure that Severin doesn't become more so.
And these boys, we see them mostly in their 20s in the 1990s in Los Angeles. Tell me about being that age in the 90s in Los Angeles. What was that the era of?
That's a really excellent question. I mean, I'm somewhat preoccupied with the early 90s because again, I feel like that's a huge kind of tectonic cultural shift.
Do we have a grasp on it yet? I mean, not sorry to interrupt, but I just want to work that in as well.
I don't think that we do. I mean, I think that there are certain indicators that came into play. I mean, my own private belief is that that's when. I mean, after the Berlin Wall fell and global capitalism therefore won, we were left with a kind of metastatic impulse in American culture where things became very, very big. Jonathan Franzen, in his essay "Perchance to Dream," has just an interesting line, a sort of throwaway line about it's something to the effect that the rich lateral dramas of local manners are being replaced by the vertical hierarchy of corporate preference. I just misquoted him terribly, but
even so, it's interesting.
It struck me as being but the essence of it just sort of being that, that American culture is becoming more uniform and more vertical. And, that moment, the early 90s, which on the one hand was, I was that age at that time. I was in my early 20s, and which is a very exciting and perplexing time, both. And it was an exciting and perplexing time for me as someone that was beginning to, make my rapprochement with Los Angeles and coming to embrace this place again, and experiencing all those things at once, experiencing the possibilities of young life, the frustrations, the fears, and I just found that a very rich place to be experiencing it, and also a very rich place, therefore, in the book to stage those questions.
You have this trio of boys, Nate, Severin, and Will. They get the rumor of a Guns N' Roses show on the Strip. Yeah. They don't like Guns N' Roses, but they're compelled to go to the Guns N' Roses show as if it were a force of nature. What is going on?
Well, there are several things going on there. I mean, one real basic thing is I think this isn't a sort of complement to the question you were asking about Bo and commerciality and what we've just been discussing, which is, I think they're compelled by a secret desire to let their aesthetic guard down and participate in something that they know is politically wrong and aesthetically a little reprehensible and at the same time kind of excellent. And I think that in a strange way, the movies still do that on occasion, even though it's, I feel like even now that the sense that the need to see the blockbuster starts to feel more like a glum patriotic duty than like a participation in a ritual. But I, the way, as you asked that question here, I think, yeah, that's what they're doing. That is a moment where they're succumbing to their father's belief system.
He probably had a few Guns N' Roses tapes in the year that they were most relevant because they're at the top of the charts. Of course, I've got this. I don't even forget. Use Your Illusion. I don't know which album he would have in there.
Well, the other aspect of it was, of course, that I just felt that was such an iconic Los Angeles thing.
Right.
The band was an iconic Los
There's another iconic element there. I mean, opening for Guns N' Roses is LA Guns, and the bands that have had some intermingling, but narratives that split off starkly. The story of Guns N' Roses and LA Guns, I mean, what is that story to you?
Well, I think the book is fairly preoccupied throughout, not preoccupied, but it certainly circles around and around to the question of, the difference between the star and the also ran. In a certain sense, all the people in the book, all the primary people in the book are also rans. They're not, that the actor that Bo is closest to does not become a star. The book opens with a scene that, possibly involves George Clooney, possibly involves some guy who just may have looked a little like George Clooney. And that's one of the different ways that the book is trying to negotiate too the question of what is the psychic power of fame and what is the psychic cost of fame. What does it mean? And this is, again, not even a Hollywood question. It's like, what does it mean anymore to have a private life? What's the difference between your private life and your public life? And since we all have social media at this point, we all do have a public life.
Right. Are we interested in the private life of George Clooney in the exact same way we're interested in the private life of a coworker we often see? We want to know details because of the familiarity we feel?
I'm infinitely more interested in the private life of my coworker. Okay. But I think...
I say we in the humanities sense.
I understand what you mean. And the answer, on the one hand, is of course not. But on the other hand, sure. I mean, all of us are sort of limited by what we can perceive and interested in cracking that limitation in order to find some proof that other people are like us. I think what we all want most in the world, I think on some primal level, human beings just want to know that they're like others, or that others are like them, that their peccadillos and their weirdness is not hopelessly, existentially crippling.
Right.
And, in so many ways, the sort of fixation on the private lives of famous people, I think, has to do with, on the one hand, we're all trying to inoculate ourselves against our own faults and flaws, and all somehow imagining that if we can just become the person that everybody else is looking at, we won't have the burden of our private life anymore. Nothing could be further from the truth. The opposite is true.
Do we want to know the celebrities are like us, but do we also want to be reassured that they aren't like us? I mean, I think of growing up, the moment when you see at your teacher at the grocery store, it's always like, whoa, you don't belong in this context. You have just gotten out of the sphere where you belong in my mind. We also don't want to see them brought low, right?
We don't, because we want to sustain our illusion that it's possible to escape from the burden of ourselves. I would like to sustain that fantasy at times, and I'm sure, again, I would imagine that most people do. It's a very human thing to want.
The voice in the book, when it follows certain characters, it hints that these characters believe that Hollywood is not classy anymore compared to some prelapsarian era, I think of a line about actresses having turned into, the word wasn't collagen vultures, but it was collagen something. I mean, that was for me a metaphor for the whole thing. Have we always thought that Hollywood has gone to the dogs in that sense?
I don't think it's about Hollywood going to the dogs. I think that really that's a culture-wide thing, and I think it's
so it's all going.
Well, no, I wouldn't necessarily frame it in terms of decay, but I would frame it in terms of a decline of manners, and one hardly has to look at the movie business at all to realize that's true. One looks at Mad Men and one sees a world in which people behaved, in no sense better, in many respects worse, but I think there were just a different set of social codes at that time, and Hollywood has participated in reshaping those social codes aggressively. I mean, the book really kind of, I think, lifts off with the decline of the Hays Code in 1968, and that changed what could be represented in the movies, which changed the movies for a while for the better. I think quite for the better. But then it also led to people seeing different standards of what constituted public language, what constituted public behavior, what constituted private behavior. I think we're still sorting that out. We always will be.
There's a colleague that Bo has in the book, for much of the book, to whom he looks up, Williams Farquharson III. Yeah. This man was one of the most fascinating in the book to me because he seems to operate by his own social codes that are social codes of a slightly previous era, that are he adheres more rigidly, maybe more in a more disciplined way. How do you describe that quality about this man?
Yeah, he's an interesting character. He's and in many ways, an even more confused one than Bo, and confused in that way that I think people who think that they know their own codes, people who really think that they know how they are, usually are the most deluded and the most troubled. Again, I think that's one of the many things about Bo, is that for all of his self-delusion and his foolishness, I think he doesn't fool himself into thinking he can't be fooled. And Williams is a character. The elder Williams is a character who evidently thinks that he can control himself. He can coordinate his impulses. He can rule things, and of course, in a way that turns out to be very difficult for all concerned, he discovers that that's not true.
It's something, it reminds me of what the women in the book say about Bo, is they're not sure why they're going along with him. They're not sure why they're sleeping with him, but he just has a quality that they don't see much, especially if they're in the industry. Is that a way to frame it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think what Bo has going for him is he's natural. He's not artificial. I mean, if I had to guess, don't ask me to know too much about those selection processes necessarily, but I would say that is kind of a key aspect of Bo's appeal, is just how comfortable he is within his supremely warty person.
Does Hollywood think it's less relevant than it is now, or more relevant than it is? Which way is the delusion listing at this point?
What do you mean at the moment? Does
The
business
by now, because I see shifts in this throughout the history of it in the book. But it seems like at any point Hollywood is always more relevant than the people in it seem to think it is, or less relevant. Do you think that's even gaugeable, I guess?
I don't really know how that would gauge itself. I mean, on the one hand, I feel like most of the people I know in Hollywood are struggling with a sense of people I know in the feature business are probably struggling somewhat with a sense of wondering what its function is anymore. Oh, really? I might be alone in that, so I might just be speaking for myself. But I think that that fewer movies get made than used to get made. More and more of those movies are tentpoles, and so I would imagine that anyone in Hollywood who has any aesthetic sense at all is grappling with that as a question. You just have to. You have to say to yourself, well, what kind of movies can I make? And the truth is, that the kind of movies that you can make in Hollywood has gotten much narrower. I don't know that necessarily translates into anxiety about reduced relevance to the culture. I mean, people still go to the movies. The movies make a tremendous amount of money. No matter how aesthetically piffling we might think a lot of them are, those movies still take in huge quantities of dough if they succeed. And so I doubt there's too much hand-wringing about relevance. Now, whether, when you look at the cultural conversation and you realize people talk about dramatic television or, cable television as in a way that they, with a vigor that they did not used to. I don't remember very many conversations about what was on TV, in my 20s. And
was it definitely a lesser medium, regarded as a lesser medium in those days?
Sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, TV was considered the and if not the bottom rung, a lower rung than features. That certainly is not true anymore.
Right. I myself, I think, moved to Los Angeles for the movie-going possibilities. How much movie-going do you do yourself at this point?
Less than I used to, but some. Again, it's interesting because I have a daughter, so of course I take her to see things that she wants to see. But I do not go as often as I used to, and I don't think that I certainly do go, but it's hard to get excited to see movies that feel entirely pre-digested.
I see. I know what you mean, but I wonder, because we live here in Los Angeles, the other week I think 3 in a row, I saw a new Brazilian movie, and then Two Lane Blacktop, and then Sunset Boulevard.
Well, I'll go see those movies any day of the week.
Right. I will too, but does living in Los Angeles or New York, for that matter, put us in a bubble about what the movies are?
Well, it certainly puts us in a different position. I mean, it's one has more to choose from. Although again, it depends. I mean, I think I went when I was in Iowa City a month or two ago, and I went to see a French film, Holy Motors. And and I thought, well, this is an interesting movie to be seeing in downtown Iowa City, but here I am. I don't think it puts us in a bubble about what the movies are, because I think, certainly the mainstream movies are being released everywhere. The question is, what about movies like that aren't necessarily being, I happen to be in a university setting, which is why I was able to see that movie in Iowa City. You probably couldn't see it in downtown Cedar Rapids.
And it's like all eras, all cinematic eras exist at once here, don't they? That's how I envision it. It's not true everywhere. I don't think. I mean, here it's sort of like if you could go to a movie and not see a new one, right. You could go every day.
Yes. Well, sure. There's for obvious reasons, an acute sense of cinematic history that happens here, and that I hope will always happen. I mean, one of the things that I did think about when writing this book, or it wasn't even something I thought about. It was just something I felt, which was I wanted to capture what on the one hand felt very private, which was a sense of the Los Angeles that has disappeared, and the eternal Los Angeles, the one that exists even after it's disappeared. And put like that, I really think that's part of what any books are supposed to do for us, is sort of present us with or good books are supposed to do it anyway, which is present us with a eternal matter, with things that are gone and things that can never be destroyed.
What element of Los Angeles jumps out at you as something that's always been here for you, something that isn't going to go away? What seems particularly non-ephemeral in your experience of Los Angeles? And I mean, this could be as concrete or as abstract as you want it to be, but something that just seems like it's always been here in Los Angeles during at least your time here.
It's a good question, and part of me, the tragedian in me wants to say nothing. Everything is going to be gone, and that's also, I think, articulated in the book. And by everything, of course, I don't mean that in an apocalyptic sense. I mean it in a personal sense. What has been here? Well, in the most private sense, my family has always been here. They will not always be here, but they are here now. Both the generation before me and the generation in front of me.
Is there more in this setting for you? Do you think there's more in the setting for you, literarily speaking?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm very conscious of not wanting to constrain myself to writing dramas set in Los Angeles. My first novel is set in the Midwest. The book that I've just started is set. A little bit of it is set here, but there also thus far seem to be sections set in San Francisco, London, Iowa City, Iraq. Any of which could be rewritten into oblivion. But I'm very interested in other places. However, Los Angeles retains a kind of power for me, and I would really not care to cheat myself of that as a writer.
And all of these places you think about, these non-Los Angeles places, if you're anything like me, they just cast more light back into Los Angeles, don't they?
Well, they do. I mean, in the sense that places all cast light onto one another. I mean, I think, and likewise, there are sections of this book and very significant sections of it that are set in New York, and that's deliberate. New York is sort of the shadow matter to this book. There's a sense for me that somehow the little slivers of New York that make it into it are sort of there to offset the kind of brightness or some aspect of Los Angeles that would otherwise be too relentless in this book.
They're a bit of the yin and yang, are they not? Los Angeles, New York. Is that too easy?
Yeah, that might be a little simple, but they are important complements. Even if the way in which we make them that might be a little forced. We think of Los Angeles as being the horizontal, sunlit city, and we think of New York as being the more austere, more grand one. And again, I feel like even describing them that way is somewhat reductive. But they're different, and they're in some ways opposed, I think.
I've been speaking here at the Los Angeles Review of Books headquarters with Matthew Specktor, author of American Dream Machine, founding editor of the Los Angeles Review of Books, and much more. We'll link to his various projects, to what we know about them, in the show notes. Matthew, thanks so much.
Thanks, Colin.
This has been the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast. I've been Colin Marshall, and you can find much more at lareviewofbooks.org. Thanks.